This is my DT project for 2020-2021, Patterns in Nature. Factors. Introduction. This project is about patterns in nature, but it's not about just any pattern. It is about fractals. A fractal is something that repeats itself, like a tree or lightning. But there is more to fractals in nature than that. Fractals can look different than a tree, like a mountain range. There are many different fractals in nature, from trees to earth. The world is full of fractals. What is a fractal? Now, it is important to know what a fractal is. A fractal is something that repeats itself, something that is self-similar, like the most common example, a tree. A tree branches out, and each of those branches branch out, and each of those branches branch out, and so on until it stops. Now remember that we are talking about fractals in nature, not fractals generally, because geometric fractals, such as a cut snowflake, go infinitely, and fractals in nature don't. If you are still a little confused, I will explain more later. Fractal dimension. You know that a cube is 3D and a square is 2D, but you may not know that a line is 1D and a single point is 0D. But you definitely don't know the dimension of which a fractal is. Fractals do not have a full dimension. It would be 1 and a bit dimensional or 2 and a bit dimensional because of the way they are created. Fractals are made when particles randomly move and stick to clusters. And when those particles touch something, they stay there. More randomly moving particles come and stick to anything they touch, allowing there to be gaps. This makes them have a dimension that is not a whole number, but the more space it takes up, the closer it is to a whole number. Finding a fractal. The definition of the word fractal is debatable. Mathematicians don't even know. But the best way to define a fractal is by comparing it to other shapes and patterns. The word fractal was created by Benoit Mandelbrot in 1975. It comes from the Latin word fractus, which means broken. It would describe a shape different from other shapes, a shape that doesn't have simple lines or curves. It used to be that only geometric shapes like spheres and squares had names. The other shapes like fractals had no name because they were too messy, but now fractals have a name. Fractals look about the same at different scales. For example, if you break off a piece of a tree, it will look very similar to the whole tree. The same goes for all fractals. This means that a fractal looks almost the same at different scales. From trees to soot. When I read the introduction for this presentation, you probably wondered, how could soot ever be a fractal? Remember fractal dimension? Soot is a fractal because of the way it is made. Now, of course, there are other ways fractals can be made, but this is the way I'm telling you. The same thing goes for rocks. They are made in a way a fractal is made, but rocks can also be fractals in a different way. Like I said in defining fractals look about the same at different scales. Think about breaking rocks. If a boulder breaks in half, each of those rocks would look very similar. When those rocks break, the rocks they break into also look similar to the whole rock. This process continues again and again when that rock breaks. If the rock is not being compared to the real size of something other than a rock, or if there is not anything telling you what size the rock is, you would not be able to tell the correct size of the rock. It could be a boulder, pebble, or even a grain of sand. All fractals are this way. And then this is a rock. Other patterns. So far, I have only talked about fractals, but I have not talked about the other two patterns I had to choose from to do my project about. These two patterns are the Fibonacci sequence and spirals. But again, I'm only talking about fractals in nature. So of course, I will only be talking about these patterns in nature. You know that what a spiral is, right? but maybe you don't know what the Fibonacci sequence is. This is 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. This pattern continues. If you still don't get it, I will explain. The next number is the sum of the last two numbers in the sequence. I did not study spirals in the Fibonacci sequence, so I will only include one thing about them. Spirals show up on snail shells, the middle part of some flowers, galaxies, and much more. Fibonacci sequence can show up in many plants. Fractals in our bodies. There are not only fractals around us, there are fractals inside us too, such as blood vessels. Humans are natural things, so the fractals inside of us are also natural. Our lungs have lots of airways, and blood vessels branch out everywhere in our bodies. The use of fractals. Have you noticed that fractals are very common in the natural world? Because if you have, you probably think that fractals have a use, and they do. Think about the fractals in our body. The fractal structure of our blood vessels helps get blood everywhere in our body, and the fractals in our lungs help us breathe. Fractals can spread out a lot. This allows it to move things to many places. You can see how fractals can be useful. Conclusion. As you can see, fractals are everywhere. I think fractals are pretty cool, and maybe you think so too, but they are a stress reliever and are very useful. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I'm going to go now, so bye. Also, I might have made some mistakes reading this and making this, but it's just the way sometimes things go. So please forgive me. And then these are some examples of fractals. And then these are my resources. Thank you for listening to me read this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.